The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark void between stars. It was bigger than most cities on Earth, with gleaming metal walls and thousands of windows that sparkled like diamonds. Inside the station's main meeting hall, beings from 12 different worlds sat around a huge circular table. The air hummed with the sound of translation devices working overtime to help everyone understand each other. Captain Jake Morrison straightened his blue uniform as he looked around the room. The human delegation was small compared to the others. Next to him sat Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park, a sharp woman who knew more about military strategy than most generals. Dr. Alex Wright, their alien expert, was busy taking notes on his tablet. And then there was Danny Hayes. Danny was the kind of person you might walk past on the street without noticing. He stood only 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed about as much as a teenager. His brown hair was neat but ordinary, and his uniform seemed a little too big for his thin frame. Among the impressive aliens in the room, he looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong meeting. The Krillian delegation made everyone else look small. Ambassador Zethkar towered over the table at nearly 8 feet tall. His body was covered in thick, dark armor that looked like it could stop a bullet. His forearms moved constantly as he spoke, and his insect-like eyes never seemed to blink. When he looked at the humans, he made a clicking sound that the translator said meant laughter, but not the good kind. The Vexhi were different, but just as intimidating. They looked almost human, but their skin had a blue tint and their heads were larger to hold their massive brains. Ambassador Velthar spoke in mathematical formulas half the time, as if everything in the universe could be solved with numbers. Their technology was so advanced that their chairs floated above the ground without making any sound. The Crystalline Federation sent a being made entirely of living rock. Quarth looked like someone had carved a person out of purple gemstone and brought it to life. When he spoke, the sound came from vibrations in his crystal body, creating music that was both beautiful and somehow threatening. Other species filled the remaining seats. The aquatic collective had brought beings that looked like walking octopuses in water-filled suits. The hive mind sent creatures that moved perfectly together, as if they shared one brain. Each delegation looked powerful and confident. Danny sat quietly in his chair, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. While the other humans focused on the formal presentations, he noticed small things. The way the Krillian ambassador's left arm twitched when he lied, how the Vexhi delegation glanced at each other in a pattern that suggested secret communication, the fact that 3 different species kept looking at the humans with the same expression he had seen on his cat's face just before it pounced on a mouse. The meeting began with the usual diplomatic talk. Each species presented their claims to different star systems and trade routes. The Krillians wanted more mining rights. The Vexhi demanded exclusive access to certain research stations. Everyone had reasons why they deserved more territory and why the humans deserved less. Captain Morrison stood when it was their turn to speak. He activated a holographic display showing Earth's solar system and the nearby colonies. His presentation was professional and well-prepared, talking about human settlements and trade agreements, but Danny could see that none of the aliens were really listening. They were waiting for something else. During a break in the formal talks, the aliens mingled with each other but avoided the humans. Danny walked slowly around the room, pretending to admire the station's architecture. His small size let him get close to conversations without being noticed. Most people ignored him completely, assuming he was just some minor assistant. That was when he heard it. Ambassador Zethkar was speaking to Velthar in low tones, using a mixture of their languages that the translator struggled with. But Danny had studied both languages during his training. The words he caught made his blood run cold. The human fleet is smaller than expected, Zethkar was saying. 3 ships, maybe 4 escort vessels. Nothing that could threaten our combined forces. Velthar's response was even worse. The mathematical probability of success approaches certainty. Once we eliminate their leadership here, their remaining forces will be scattered and confused. Earth's hyperspace routes will be ours within a standard galactic month. Danny kept walking, his face showing nothing of the fear that was building inside him. He passed near a group from the Shadow Syndicate, criminals who usually stayed hidden. In the outer systems, they were talking to representatives from 3 other species, making plans that had nothing to do with the official negotiations. The truth hit him like a punch to the stomach. This whole diplomatic meeting was a trap. The aliens had lured the human delegation here to kill them and then attack Earth while humanity's leaders were gone. They thought humans were weak and easy to defeat. Looking around the room at all the powerful alien species, Danny had to admit they might be right. But as he continued his quiet walk around the room, Danny began to notice other things. The aliens were confident, maybe too confident. They made assumptions about humans based on physical appearance and technology levels. They saw weakness where humans saw adaptability. They saw primitive behavior where humans saw creative thinking. The formal session resumed, and Danny took his seat again. Captain Morrison was answering questions about human military capabilities, giving honest but carefully limited information. The aliens nodded and smiled, clearly thinking that humans had revealed all their secrets. They had no idea that human military doctrine was built around deception and surprise. As the day wore on, Danny watched and listened. He memorized faces, voices, and the small gestures that revealed who was really in charge of each delegation. He noticed which species were natural allies, and which ones only worked together when it benefited them. Most importantly, he began to understand something that might save them all. The aliens thought they knew everything about humans. They had studied Earth's history and technology. They knew about human wars and politics, but they had missed the most important thing about humanity. They did not understand that humans were dangerous precisely because they were unpredictable. They could not imagine that the weakest person in the room might also be the most risky. The meeting ended with polite words and promises to continue talks the next day. As the delegations filed out of the hall, Danny stayed close to his team but said nothing about what he had learned. The station's corridors were probably monitored, and any sign that humans suspected the trap would ruin their only chance of survival. That night, alone in his quarters, Danny stared out at the stars and began to form a plan. It was crazy and dangerous, with almost no chance of success, but it was also completely unexpected, which made it the most human thing he could possibly do. Tomorrow he would show these aliens why underestimating humanity was the biggest mistake they would ever make. Danny woke up before dawn, his mind racing with the terrible knowledge he had gained the night before. The space station's artificial day cycle was just beginning, casting soft light through his small window. He dressed quickly in his uniform and made his way to the communications center, where he was supposed to monitor routine transmissions between the station and various fleets. The communications bay was quiet at this early hour. Most of the alien delegations were still sleeping, which gave Danny the perfect opportunity to dig deeper into what he had overheard. He sat down at his workstation and began running what looked like routine system checks, but he was actually searching for encrypted communications between the alien fleets. What he found was worse than he had imagined. Hidden beneath layers of diplomatic chatter and routine ship-to-ship communications was a massive coordinated effort. 12 different alien fleets were moving into position around human space. The messages were encrypted, but Danny had always been good with codes and patterns. During his training, his instructors had been amazed at how quickly he could break alien communication systems. The first breakthrough came when he realized that the Krillians were using an old military code that Earth intelligence had cracked years ago. Their messages revealed fleet positions and attack schedules. The assault on the human delegation was planned for tomorrow night, during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. After that, the alien fleets would attack every major human colony simultaneously. Danny's hands shook as he copied the data to a secure storage device. The scope of the conspiracy was enormous. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together, united only by their desire to claim human territory. They saw Earth's hyperspace routes as the key to controlling trade in this part of the galaxy. A soft sound made him freeze. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Danny quickly switched his screen back to normal communications monitoring and tried to look bored. A Krillian security officer walked past the open door, his 4 eyes scanning the room briefly before moving on. Danny waited until the footsteps faded before returning to his work. The Vex-High communications were harder to crack, but Danny noticed. They were using mathematical sequences that followed predictable patterns. It took him 2 hours, but eventually he broke through their encryption. Their messages were cold and logical, discussing the human problem like it was a simple equation to solve. They had calculated the exact number of ships needed to overwhelm Earth's defenses and were already planning how to divide human territory among the allied species. The Shadow Syndicate was more careful with their communications, but they made one crucial mistake. They used slang terms and references that Danny recognized from his studies of criminal organizations. These weren't official government representatives at all. They were pirates and smugglers who had been hired to do the dirty work that the respectable species did not want to handle directly. By midday, Danny had mapped out the entire conspiracy. He knew which fleets were where, when they planned to attack, and how they intended to divide up human space afterward. But knowing about the trap and getting out of it were two very different things. The nearest human fleet was 3 days away, and their escort ships were no match for even one of the alien fleets, let alone 12. Danny's small size became an advantage as he moved through the station's maintenance tunnels. The service corridors were designed for automated repair drones, not living beings. But Danny was just barely small enough to crawl through them. He used these hidden passages to plant listening devices near the alien quarters and to access computer terminals that were supposed to be secure. In one tunnel, he almost ran into a Krillian patrol that was checking the station's security systems. Danny pressed himself against the wall in a side passage, holding his breath as the massive aliens walked past just inches away. Their conversation confirmed his worst fears. They were not just planning to kill the human delegation. They were planning to make it look like an accident, so the other galactic powers would not interfere when they attacked Earth. The afternoon diplomatic session was torture for Danny. He sat in his chair, pretending to take notes while the aliens continued their fake negotiations. Ambassador Zethkar made grand speeches about peace and cooperation, while Danny knew the Krillian was planning mass murder. Velthar discussed trade agreements that would never be honored, since the Vex-High intended to take everything by force. Danny caught Captain Morrison's eye and made a subtle hand signal that meant urgent communication needed. It was a gesture from their military training that looked like he was just adjusting his collar. The captain nodded slightly, understanding that something was wrong, but not knowing how serious it was. During another break, Danny managed to get close to Dr. Wright. Speaking in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, he said, "I need to show you something tonight. Something about our new friends." Wright looked confused but nodded. Danny could not say more without risking the alien surveillance systems overhearing. The real breakthrough came when Danny accessed the station's central computer core. Using his knowledge of human programming languages, he found backdoors that only Earth's technicians would know about. The aliens had purchased some of their computer systems from human companies, never realizing that Earth's programmers always left themselves secret ways to access their own equipment. Through these hidden pathways, Danny gained access to communications between the alien leaders and their home governments. The messages painted a picture of a galaxy that saw humanity as a threat that needed to be eliminated before it became too powerful. Earth's rapid expansion and adaptability had frightened species that had been dominant for thousands of years. But the aliens had made a critical error in their planning. They assumed that humans thought and acted like they did. The Krillians expected humans to fight with honor and strength. The Vex-High believed humans would respond logically to overwhelming odds. None of them understood that humans specialized in doing the unexpected, especially when their backs were against the wall. As the day ended, Danny had gathered enough evidence to prove the conspiracy, but he still faced the problem of what to do with the information. Any attempt to send a message to Earth would be intercepted by alien communications networks. Their escort ships could not fight 12 fleets and win. Running away would only delay the inevitable attack on Earth's colonies. That evening, Danny sat in his quarters and stared at the data he had collected. The smart thing to do would be to find a way to warn Earth and let the military handle the problem, but there was not enough time for that. By the time human reinforcements arrived, the trap would have been sprung, and the alien fleets would be attacking defenseless colonies. Danny realized that the only way to save humanity was to turn the aliens' trap against them. He could not match their military strength or technological superiority, but he could use their assumptions and prejudices as weapons against them. The key was making them believe that attacking humans would be more dangerous than leaving them alone. It was a plan that required perfect timing, incredible luck, and the kind of reckless courage that only humans seem to possess. Danny smiled grimly as he began to work out the details. Tomorrow he would show these aliens why the weakest human in the room was also the most dangerous person they would ever meet. The plan was insane, but that was exactly what made it perfect. No alien mind would ever expect what Danny was about to do. Danny barely slept that night. His mind kept racing through the details of his plan, looking for flaws and weak points. Every few minutes he would think of something new that could go wrong, and he would have to adjust his strategy. By morning, he had a plan that was either brilliant or completely crazy, probably both. The first challenge was telling his team what he had discovered without alerting the alien surveillance systems. Danny knew that every room on the station was monitored, and any direct conversation about the conspiracy would trigger immediate action from the aliens. He needed to be clever about how he shared the information. During breakfast in the human delegation's private dining area, Danny began his careful communication. He started by making casual comments about the station's communication systems, mentioning that he had noticed some interesting patterns in the data traffic. Captain Morrison looked up from his coffee with curiosity, while Dr. Wright and Lieutenant Commander Park continued eating. Danny then began discussing his hobby of studying alien cultures, specifically their military traditions and honor codes. He talked about how different species had different approaches to warfare, some preferring direct confrontation, while others favored strategic deception. As he spoke, he used hand signals and eye movements that his military training had taught him for silent communication in dangerous situations. The message he sent was simple: danger, trap, all alien fleets. Attack planned tonight. Captain Morrison's face remained calm, but Danny saw his jaw tighten slightly. The captain was experienced enough to recognize a serious threat when he heard one, even delivered in code. Dr. Wright put down his fork and began paying closer attention to Danny's seemingly academic discussion about alien psychology. Lieutenant Commander Park was the first to catch on completely. Her training in military intelligence had taught her to look for hidden meanings in ordinary conversations. When Danny began talking about game theory and how different species might coordinate their actions for mutual benefit, she understood that he was describing a real conspiracy. Over the next hour, Danny managed to convey the basic outline of what he had discovered. He could not share all the details, but he gave them enough information to understand that the diplomatic mission was actually a trap designed to eliminate Earth's leadership before a massive coordinated attack on human space. The team's reaction was exactly what Danny had expected. Captain Morrison's first instinct was to contact their escort ships and prepare for immediate evacuation. Dr. Wright wanted to find a way to send a warning message to Earth. Lieutenant Commander Park began calculating their tactical options, all of which looked hopeless against 12 alien fleets. But Danny had a different idea. Instead of running or fighting conventionally, he proposed something that sounded completely insane. He wanted to convince the aliens that attacking humanity would be more dangerous than leaving them alone. The plan relied on psychology rather than firepower, deception instead of direct confrontation. Danny explained his strategy using the same careful code language they had been using all morning. He would turn the aliens' own assumptions against them by making them believe that humans were far more dangerous and unpredictable than they appeared. The key was exploiting each species' particular fears and cultural blind spots. The Krillians valued strength and honor above everything else. They respected opponents who fought bravely, but feared enemies who fought without rules or predictable patterns. Danny planned to convince them that humans were capable of tactics so chaotic and destructive that engaging them would be suicidal. The Vexhi were logical and calculating. They made decisions based on mathematical analysis and probability calculations. If Danny could introduce enough uncertainty into their equations, they would conclude that attacking humans carried unacceptable risks. The Shadow Syndicate were criminals motivated by profit. They would abandon any operation that threatened to cost more than it would gain. Danny needed to make them believe that tangling with humanity would destroy their organization completely. The other alien species were following the lead of these three main conspirators. If Danny could break up the alliance, the smaller groups would lose their courage and back down from the planned attack. Captain Morrison listened to Danny's proposal with growing amazement and horror. The plan required the human delegation to stay on the station and face the alien conspiracy directly, using nothing but words and psychological manipulation to defeat an overwhelming military force. It was the kind of strategy that only worked in adventure stories, not real life. But Dr. Wright began to see the genius in Danny's approach. His knowledge of alien psychology told him that each species did indeed have predictable responses to certain types of stress and uncertainty. If Danny could push the right psychological buttons, he might actually be able to break up the conspiracy without firing a single shot. Lieutenant Commander Park was the hardest to convince. Her military training emphasized careful planning and overwhelming force. Danny's strategy violated every principle of conventional warfare. But as she thought about their situation, she realized that conventional tactics would not work anyway. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. The only weapon they had was the one thing that made humans different from every other species in the galaxy: their willingness to try impossible things. The team spent the morning working out the details of Danny's plan. Each member would play a specific role designed to support his psychological warfare campaign. Captain Morrison would act like a military commander who had anticipated every move the aliens might make. Dr. Wright would drop hints about secret human technologies that did not actually exist. Lieutenant Commander Park would make casual references to mysterious contingency protocols and deep space assets. But the success of the entire operation depended on Danny's ability to manipulate the complex web of alien relationships and communication patterns. He would have to become someone completely different from the quiet, unremarkable communications specialist that everyone thought he was. The afternoon diplomatic session was scheduled to begin with final negotiations about territorial boundaries. The aliens expected to present their ultimatum and watch the humans react with predictable fear and anger. Instead, they would face something that no species in the galaxy had ever dealt with before: a human who had nothing left to lose and was prepared to embrace complete chaos. Danny spent the last hour before the session reviewing everything he knew about each alien species. He memorized their cultural taboos, their historical fears, and the psychological triggers that would cause them to question their own judgment. Most importantly, he prepared himself to become the most dangerous thing in the galaxy: a human who was willing to be completely unpredictable. As they walked to the meeting hall, Captain Morrison put a hand on Danny's shoulder. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. Danny looked up at his captain with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "No," he said. "But that's what makes it perfect. They'll never see it coming because no sane person would ever try something this crazy." Lieutenant Commander Park shook her head in amazement. "You're either going to save humanity or get us all killed." "Maybe both," Danny replied. "But at least they'll remember us." The doors to the meeting hall opened, and the human delegation walked in to face their enemies. Danny Hayes, the weakest human in the room, was about to become the most risky opponent the aliens had ever encountered. The meeting hall felt different this time. The same aliens sat in their impressive chairs around the circular table, but Danny could sense their excitement beneath the polite diplomatic masks. They thought today would bring their final victory over humanity. They had no idea they were about to face the most dangerous opponent of their lives. Ambassador Zethkar stood first, his forearms moving in what passed for a formal gesture among the Krillians. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone who believed he held all the winning cards. "The Galactic Council has carefully considered the human territorial claims," he announced. "We have reached our final decision." The ultimatum was exactly what Danny had expected. Humanity would surrender 70% of their current territory, including all the valuable hyperspace routes. Human military forces would be reduced to local defense only. Earth's colonies would accept alien advisors to oversee their development. The terms were designed to be completely unacceptable. giving the aliens justification for the military action they had already planned. Velthar added his own mathematical analysis, proving with cold logic that resistance would be futile. The Vexi had calculated the exact military forces that humanity could bring to bear, and the numbers showed certain defeat for Earth. Other alien representatives nodded in agreement, clearly expecting the humans to either surrender immediately or storm out in anger. Captain Morrison started to respond with the kind of diplomatic protest that everyone expected, but Danny stood up instead. His small figure looked almost comical next to the towering aliens, but his voice carried a strange confidence that made everyone in the room pause. "Thank you for that generous offer," Danny said, his tone so calm it was almost cheerful. "But I'm afraid I need to speak for a different authority than Captain Morrison represents." The aliens looked confused. What authority could this insignificant human possibly represent? Danny smiled and requested permission to address the full assembly, claiming to speak for what he called the real human government that had remained hidden until now. Ambassador Zethkar was curious enough to agree, probably thinking that watching the humans squirm would be entertaining. The other aliens settled back in their chairs, ready to enjoy the spectacle of a primitive species facing the reality of their situation. Danny began his presentation, and from the first words, he sounded like a completely different person. Gone was the quiet, unremarkable communication specialist. In his place stood someone who spoke with the authority of hidden knowledge and terrible secrets. He started by talking about human history, but not the sanitized version that appeared in diplomatic briefings. Danny described Earth's wars with a focus on the most chaotic and unpredictable events. He talked about battles where tiny forces defeated massive armies through sheer insanity. He mentioned scientific discoveries that came from humans trying impossible experiments that any rational species would avoid. "You see," Danny explained, walking slowly around the table as he spoke, "other species try to minimize risk and chaos. Humans embrace it. We don't just adapt to dangerous situations, we create them on purpose because that's where we do our best work." The aliens began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Danny's words seemed like random babbling at first, but there was something unsettling about his confidence and the casual way he discussed concepts that should have been beyond human understanding. Danny continued by mentioning certain scientific principles that only the most advanced species knew about. He talked about quantum mechanics and dimensional theory in ways that suggested human scientists had made breakthroughs that the galaxy's experts had missed. None of it was true, but Danny delivered each impossible claim with such matter-of-fact certainty that the aliens began to wonder what else they might have underestimated about humanity. The psychological pressure increased as Danny began referencing specific historical events from different alien cultures. He talked about ancient wars and political upheavals with the kind of detailed knowledge that suggested human involvement in conflicts that supposedly happened before Earth had even developed space travel. The Krelian-Vexi border war of 2387, Danny mentioned casually. Terrible business, both sides lost so many ships. Of course, that was before we perfected the stealth technology, so our observers had to stay much further away than we would prefer. Zethkar's armored face showed confusion and growing alarm. That war had been a carefully guarded secret between the two species. How could a human know about it, let alone claim that Earth had been secretly observing? Danny saved his masterstroke for the conspiracy itself. Instead of acting shocked or afraid when he revealed his knowledge of the planned attack, he spoke about it like it was something humanity had been expecting and planning for. "We've been watching your fleet movements for weeks," Danny said, looking directly at each alien delegation in turn. 12 battle groups positioned around our major colonies. Very impressive coordination. It must have taken months to organize something that complex without us noticing. The aliens froze. How could the humans know about the fleet positions? Had their communications been compromised? Were there human spies they had not detected? Danny continued with growing confidence. "Of course, we've been using this situation for our own purposes. It's not often that so many different species reveal their true capabilities all at once. Our intelligence services have learned more about your military doctrines in the past month than they had in the previous century." Velthar's logical mind began running probability calculations. trying to determine if the humans' claims could be true. The mathematics were troubling. If humans had detected the conspiracy early enough to turn it into an intelligence-gathering operation, what else might they have planned? The real genius of Danny's performance was how he made the aliens question not just human capabilities, but their own assumptions. He suggested that the conspiracy itself might have been manipulated by human agents, that the aliens might have been dancing to Earth's tune all along without realizing it. The beautiful thing about chaos, Danny explained, is that you can hide almost anything inside it. While you've been planning your attack, we've been preparing our response. Not the kind of response you're expecting, of course. That would be too predictable for humans. Captain Morrison played his part perfectly, adopting the demeanor of a military officer who knew exactly what Danny was talking about. Dr. Wright began making notes about protocols and authorization codes that sounded ominous without revealing anything specific. Lieutenant Commander Park started checking her communicator as if receiving updates from mysterious sources. The alien coalition began to fracture as doubt and suspicion spread through their ranks. The Krillians started wondering if their Vexhi allies had betrayed operational security. The Vexhi questioned whether their mathematical models had failed to account for human deception capabilities. The Shadow Syndicate members began calculating whether they had been set up to take the blame for an operation that was doomed from the start. Danny watched the growing chaos with satisfaction. Each species was reacting exactly as he had predicted. They would. The Krillians were becoming paranoid about honor and betrayal. The Vexhi were drowning in uncertainty that made their logical calculations impossible. The criminals were starting to think about cutting their losses and running. But Danny was not finished yet. His final revelation would either complete his victory or get them all killed immediately. He was about to tell the aliens exactly why attacking humanity would be the worst mistake they could possibly make. Danny could feel the tension in the room reaching a breaking point. The aliens were confused, suspicious, and beginning to turn on each other. But he knew that doubt alone would not be enough to stop their attack. He needed to give them a reason, to be genuinely afraid of what would happen if they followed through with their plans. He walked back to the center of the room and looked up at the towering aliens with a smile that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their seats. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that chilled them more than any threat could have. Genuine amusement. "You know what the fascinating thing is about all of this?" Danny said, gesturing around the room. "You actually think you understand what you're dealing with. You've studied our military capabilities, analyzed our technology, calculated our fleet strengths. You think you know humans?" Ambassador Zethkar's forearms twitched nervously. The Krillian warrior had faced enemies across a dozen star systems. But something about this small human's confidence was deeply unsettling. "We know enough," he growled. Danny laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the vast chamber. "No, you really don't. You see, every other species in the galaxy follows the same basic pattern. When threatened, you respond logically. You calculate odds, gather your forces, and fight according to established military doctrine. It's predictable. It's rational. It's safe." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the blow that would shatter their confidence completely. Humans don't do that. When you back a human into a corner with no way out, when you threaten everything they care about, that's when they become truly dangerous. Because that's when they stop following any rules at all. Dr. Wright chose that moment to look up from his tablet with a carefully worried expression. "Danny, are you sure you should be discussing the Omega protocols in front of non-human personnel?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every alien in the room focused on those two words, Omega protocols. They sounded official, mysterious, and ominous. Danny had to keep himself from smiling as he watched their imaginations run wild, trying to figure out what those protocols might involve. "It's all right, Doctor," Danny replied calmly. "I think our friends here deserve to know what they're really choosing between. After all, we're offering them a much better deal than they're offering us." Velthar's logical mind latched onto this statement like a computer processing new data. "What deal?" the Vex-High demanded. Danny spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable negotiation. Simple. You withdraw your fleets, forget about this whole invasion plan, and continue dealing with humanity through normal diplomatic channels. In exchange, we pretend this conversation never happened and nobody has to find out how badly your security was compromised. The aliens began talking among themselves in urgent whispers and electronic bursts. Danny caught fragments of their conversations through his understanding of their languages. The Krillians were arguing about whether humans could have infiltrated their military communications. The Vex-High were recalculating risk assessments based on unknown human capabilities. The Shadow Syndicate was debating whether to abandon the operation entirely. Captain Morrison stood up and checked his chronometer with theatrical precision. Mr. Hayes, how long do they have to decide? Danny appeared to consider this carefully. Well, Captain, the authorization codes are already in place. I suppose we could give them 6 hours? That should be enough time for their fleet commanders to receive new orders. Lieutenant Commander Park looked up from her communicator with a grim expression. Sir, I'm getting status reports from the outer monitoring stations. Should I tell them to proceed with the contingency plans? Not yet, Danny replied. Let's give our guests a chance to make the smart choice. The beauty of this exchange was that it sounded completely authentic while revealing absolutely nothing concrete. The aliens heard references to authorization codes, monitoring stations, and contingency plans, but had no way to verify what any of it actually meant. Their own paranoia filled in the details with possibilities far worse than anything Danny could have invented. Ambassador Zethkar tried to regain control of the situation. You are bluffing, human. Your species lacks the technology and military strength to threaten the combined fleets of 12 worlds. Danny nodded sympathetically. You're absolutely right about our technology and military strength. We can't match your firepower or your numbers. But that's exactly why you should be worried. He began walking around the table again, but this time his movement had the predatory quality of someone who held all the advantages. You see, when a species has overwhelming military superiority, they fight by the established rules of warfare. They try to minimize casualties, preserve valuable resources, and achieve clean political victories. But when a species has nothing left to lose, Danny let the sentence hang in the air, allowing each alien to imagine their own worst-case scenario. Dr. Wright added his own contribution to the psychological warfare. The xenobiological studies were quite conclusive, he said, as if continuing a conversation from earlier. Rapid mutation under extreme stress, leading to unpredictable adaptive responses. Of course, the ethical implications of weaponizing such research are troubling. Velthar's mathematical mind immediately began processing the implications of biological weapons that could adapt and mutate in real time. The Vex-High had never encountered such technology, which meant they could not calculate its effects or develop countermeasures. The final crack in the alien alliance came when Danny revealed something that should have been impossible for him to know. He mentioned the personal code names that the alien fleet commanders used in their most secret communications. These were names that changed daily and were known only to the highest levels of each military hierarchy. Admiral Ironscale is doing excellent work with the 4th Krillian Battle Group, Danny commented casually, and Commander Null 7's positioning of the Vex-High research vessels shows real tactical brilliance, although I have to say, the Shadow Syndicate's choice to use stolen military codes instead of developing their own encryption was probably a mistake. The room fell completely silent. These code names and tactical details were classified at the highest levels. If humans knew them, it meant that their intelligence network had penetrated every major alien military organization. The implications were staggering and terrifying. The alien coalition collapsed like a house of cards. Each species began demanding explanations from their allies about security breaches. Accusations flew back and forth as they tried to figure out how their most secret information had been compromised. Trust evaporated as each group wondered if the others had betrayed them to the humans. In the chaos of mutual suspicion and recrimination, Danny offered his compromise solution. Humanity would agree to test phase cooperation agreements that sounded generous, but committed them to nothing substantial. The aliens could save face by claiming diplomatic victory while actually giving up their aggressive plans entirely. The vote to accept the compromise was not even close. Faced with the possibility that attacking humans might trigger unknown and potentially catastrophic responses, every alien delegation chose the safer path of negotiated settlement. As the aliens filed out of the meeting hall, Danny could hear them continuing to argue among themselves about security failures and intelligence leaks. Some were already making plans to withdraw their fleets immediately. Others were discussing how to investigate the human intelligence network that they believed had been watching them all along. Captain Morrison waited until the last alien had left before turning to Danny with an expression of amazement and pride. "How did you know those code names and tactical details?" Danny smiled and pulled out the data storage device he had been carrying. "I didn't. I made them all up. But I delivered them with enough confidence that they assumed I must be telling the truth. When you're convinced that someone knows all your secrets, you start believing they know secrets that don't even exist." Dr. Wright shook his head in wonder. "You convinced 12 different species to abandon a military operation they had been planning for months, using nothing but psychological manipulation and creative lying." "The best part," Danny replied, "is that they'll spend years trying to figure out how we did it. They'll assume we have intelligence capabilities and military technologies that we've never even dreamed of. The fear of what we might do will keep them from trying anything like this again." Lieutenant Commander Park looked at the quiet communications specialist with new respect. "You've just turned yourself into the most wanted man in alien intelligence circles. They'll never stop trying to figure out who you really are." Danny laughed and straightened his uniform. "Let them try. By the time they figure out that I'm just a communications specialist who got lucky, the legend will be more powerful than the truth. Sometimes the best weapon is making your enemies afraid of their own imagination." The human delegation returned to Earth as heroes. Though the full details of their success remained classified, Danny received a promotion and an assignment to Special Intelligence Operations, where his unique talents could be put to good use. But the real victory was larger than any single mission. Word spread through the galaxy that humans were not just physically adaptable and